Hey guys, Mr. Klein here, and here we are with our next lesson in the chapter, talking about the Sumerians, the first real civilization in world history. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, to go back to where we were talking about with the geography of the Fertile Crescent, we're talking about this area, and we're talking about Mesopotamia, this land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers right here. And this is where the first civilization of the Sumerians developed. And these guys created an advanced society, and in the next lesson we'll talk about all their inventions and stuff, like the wheel and things, writing and things like that. But most people in Sumer, that's the land that they were in, the people from Sumer were called Sumerians, but most of them lived in rural areas or countryside. Now, our school would be considered in a rural area. There's a lot of land where people farm, and people don't live very close together. That would be considered rural. A lot of Louisiana is rural. And for example, a lot of people in Louisiana who live in rural areas don't have all the services and fancy things that people in a city have, or living in urban areas. You might think of Lafayette or Baton Rouge or New Orleans or something like that as an urban area. In urban areas, people live closer together. They have more services because people are there that can support it and things like that. But the city and the surrounding rural areas a town controls, especially at this time in history, is known as a city-state. And the Sumerians consisted of a bunch of city-states all throughout Mesopotamia. And the size of these city-states essentially depended not on how strong its farming or anything like that was, rather it's how strong its army was. And the bigger the army, the better they could fight, which means the bigger the city-state, the more area it controlled. But around 2300 BC, or about 4,300 years ago, we had our very first world ruler roll around, and this guy's name was Sargon. And his large army conquered all of Mesopotamia, and this became the world's first empire. And this is a picture of a bronze mask of Sargon. It took some damage around the eye, but that's Sargon right there. He's the first ruler in human history of an empire. And these city-states, this is what it looks like, the ruins of actually a Sumerian city-state. And we'll look at this big building here in a second. But these are the actual ruins, partially rebuilt in Iraq. It was right next to an Air Force base, and it was occupied by the Americans during the invasion and occupation of Iraq in 2003 until very recently. Now, Sumerian society was essentially based around its religion, and religion played a very important role in almost all aspects of Sumerian life. Whereas today, people aren't, even though where we live, are quite religious. Religion played an even bigger role then than they do now where we live. And Sumerians practice a type of religion that we call polytheism. Polytheism is the worship of many gods. Poly means many, means having to do with God. Ism means the belief of. So the belief of many gods is polytheism. They believed that their gods controlled all parts of nature. So there's like a sun god, a sky god, a rain god, and things like that. And they believed that these gods were very powerful, and they either caused floods or good harvests. Now, naturally, Sumerians believed that these gods controlled both good and bad, so if you wanted to be successful in life, you sure had to please the gods. Now, how did Sumerians please the gods? Well, the Sumerians believed that each city-state had their own god that they worshipped, and people relied on priests, or people perform religious ceremonies to perform sacrifices to gain the god's favor. So you give sacrifices to the god will like you, and you'll get a good harvest, or you'll have like a big cow, or when your cow has a calf or something like that. And these religious ceremonies were performed at a large temple in the center of the city called the ziggurat. And so let's go ahead and let's look at a ziggurat. Let's drop down here into southern Iraq. In the Sumerian city-state of I told you guys we would talk about that. And right here are the ruins, as you can see. This is and this was actually partially reconstructed by Saddam Hussein. And it was stopped during the invasion of Iraq and stuff. So here's the entrance to but this is actually authentic right here. And as you can see, this is a ziggurat. So let's look at this. The ziggurat is kind of like a temple and pyramid all in one. And this is what it looks like from the bottom. And let's zoom in and let's look at this. You had large staircases and stuff. This was actually rebuilt by Saddam Hussein. And what the Sumerians believed was up here at the top of the ziggurat was where the god lived. So the priest would climb all the way up to the top, and as you can see, this is from the air base right here. They climb all the way to the top and provide sacrifices to the god, hoping to please them. Okay, so this is a ziggurat. There's more pictures of it. And as you can see, the whole landscape, this is a huge building, and the ziggurat dominated the surrounding areas. So as you can see, this was the ziggurat, and this was around the town of which was right here. And then here's more of it, and right here is actually the air base where the United States had aircraft, and at the time Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi Air Force, had it. So this was one of the biggest city-states of and if you're a Christian and you read stories from the Bible, Abraham was from around so from this area in southern Iraq, if I keep on zooming out. There we go. And so right around here was where this Sumerian city-state of was. Now, these religious ceremonies, like I said, were very important. Usually be grain sacrifices, an animal sacrifice, or something like that. And the Sumerians believed that if good things happened, it was because of these sacrifices. Now, over time, Sumerian society began developing what we call a social hierarchy, or a division of society based on rank or class. So more important people are at the top of the hierarchy, less important people at the bottom. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip back and forth between this picture and our notes right here. So at the top, obviously you remember this picture was Sargon. And Sargon was the king, or the rulers of the society. They were the people who ruled. They were considered the strongest, the wealthiest, things like that. And below them were the priests who performed the religious ceremonies. Usually priests came from hereditary lines. In other words, you came from a family of priests and stuff like that. So because they did the actual sacrifices to the gods and stuff, they were considered pretty important. Below the kings and priests was a group of a middle class, middle people, and these were the merchants and craftspeople. Okay? And these were people who made specialized items, like this guy right here building a wagon. They worked with their hands and stuff, but what was important was they had special skills to build things that not just anybody could build. Scribes, which we'll talk about more, the specialized writers in Sumerian society, were here in Sumerian society here in the middle. So you have the upper class up here, these top two, the king and the priests. The middle you have the merchants, and now let's talk about the people at the bottom. The people at the bottom were more common people, such as farmers and laborers. These were people who worked all day but didn't have like real specialized skills like the merchants or craftsmen. But below them were the actual slaves who had no rights at all. Usually slaves were captured in war and stuff, and they had zero rights at all, no rights. So we have our farmers here and our slaves here at the bottom. And yes, if you notice, we go from bottom to top. And this is on purpose, because generally you had the largest population were slaves. Above them was a slightly smaller population of farmers. And then you had a smaller class of merchants, real small class of priests, and really only one king and his family. And so that's what we'll look at as we go from civilization to civilization. This social hierarchy forms, this pyramid. And with this pyramid, we'll see it throughout all of our river civilizations we look at, and even until today, where we see ruling classes all the way down to people who have no rights at all that most people don't think about. So, this is the Sumerians, the first civilization. They lived here in the Fertile Crescent. They were a city-state, so that's a city in the surrounding area where they were farming. The biggest one was the one with the biggest army. The first ruler was this guy named Sargon. And what was really important was religion, where sacrifices were held in the city at this big building called the ziggurat. And over time, Sumerian civilization developed this pyramid with the king at the top. Below him were the priests who did religious ceremonies. You have merchants and specialized craftspeople. Below them were farmers. And finally, at the bottom were slaves. So there you go. That's ancient Sumer. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.